emotional mammalian brain. This interesting little structure about the size of that almond that sits sort of midbrain and crosses in a way both sides of the brain and has these little connections to it called the hippocampus. And now, we have beliefs about this, we have scientific understandings and considerations, but this knowledge is continuingly to refine and change all the time. And I would just simply say, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to give you a model. But it's for the sake of simplicity, because the truth is, the brain is far more complex, chemically, electrically, and structurally, than we really have any comprehensive understanding of just yet. But we do believe, at least at this time in our current thinking, that the emotional brain, or our automatic defense, protective mechanism, what some people call psychologically our defense mechanisms, but our automatic adaptive protective mechanism is functioning largely in the amygdala. And there's other parts as well. But that if you were to really kind of simplify the basic responses of an amygdala brain, the intelligence of the amygdala, it would be the automatic responses of fight, flight, freeze, deer in the headlights, attachment cry, scream when someone grabs you or when you pull a baby from the mother, collapse, absolute collapse, and which includes hypoxia, loss of oxygen, and fainting, collapse, including recovery from an assault, sort of crawling in your cave, growling if someone comes near you and licking your wounds. So those functions, fight, flight, freeze, attachment, cry, collapse, and withdrawal, recovering from a wound. These automatic functions, we believe, are generally amygdala functions. The amygdala is that defensive, protective process, and the hippocampus, we believe, is what stores memory of experience, and it time orients, it time stamps, we believe, experience and memory. And we believe it has a storage, a tickler file that kind of stores memory based on whether they're dangerous or safe, pleasurable or painful, good or bad. They store memories according to that. And that the defensive system responds to that stored memory. One of the things that, and that's one of the things that would tell us, for example, whether or not we're seeing a wild boar in the back, right outside in the hall right now that got in the building, or whether we saw a wild boar in the zoo, or whether we saw a wild boar on a hunting trip when we were a kid. The ability to know exactly when that memory was stored and what level of arousal we need to protect ourselves right now. Whether we need to flight, get out of this room, or stay in the room, fight and lock down the door. Or whether whether we're going to freeze. And in that freeze moment, because the door opens and we don't know what's going to walk in, we slow down time. And as we slow down time, we're still approximating danger, and we're trying to decide exactly what's going to walk in that door and whether we are going to move that way or that way. Which side of the tracks are we on, and where's the train coming? And then, of course, collapse, we're beginning to truly lose oxygen. And the collapse function is a mammalian protection that if the baby, for example, loses the grip of the mother, the primate mama, and falls off, it doesn't get trampled by the rest of the crowd. They might be in a freeze mode while they're watching the herd run by. If you're left alone in the wild, you're going to go into a hypoxic, lack of oxygen state, and you're going to go numb and unconscious, because it's in a way a merciful death. And the other part of it is, into freeze and collapse, is, when the wolf grabs the rabbit freezes and collapses. It appears to be dead. And the wolf doesn't like dead meat, so it drops the rabbit. And the rabbit sort of opens up its eyes and, whoa, what happened? Lives to tell the story. But probably is pretty hypervigilant, and it's in a rapid freeze mode any moment, checking out constantly. Because the hypervigilant creature will probably survive and to reproduce. Probably it will. So these functions are in the brain. This part of the brain, when constantly on arousal mode, is producing a lot of adrenal cortical steroid, a lot of cortisol, and a lot of adrenaline. And that mobilizes that fight and flight function. But when freeze starts to happen and then collapse, the brain is producing an opposite, a compensatory chemical, which is more of an endogenous opiate. And that is where the collapse falling asleep. When this constant fight is going on between stimulant and opiate, there isn't a lot of room in the brain for serotonin. And serotonin is our social reasoning, mood managing, one of those mood managing, regulating chemicals. And in order for a higher brain function to take place up here in the medial prefrontal cortex, up here, that requires serotonin to light it up. So one of the things you might see when criminals came in, people who, and this was a voluntary prison, when they came in, they did a PET scan at that time, and they could see that the medial prefrontal cortex just was not lit up. In their theory, it was plugged up with junk food, fats, hydrogenated fats, and it lacked serotonin, so it wasn't lighting up. There wasn't enough, battery chemical to light the prefrontal cortex up. Now, that prefrontal cortex is important because that's where our observer is. That's where we have the ability to look at our own self reflectively, observe and analyze our own behaviors, and in a way approximate our own feelings, know what we're feeling. And if we can approximate our own heart and mind metaphorically, we then have a capacity to project that outward and approximate another person's heart or mind or feelings. And we call that empathy. We call that social conscience, social reasoning, social emotional reasoning. For the first 90 days, they changed their diet and put them on an exercise regime, and they put them on a vegan diet that was high in melatonin, tryptophan, and also it was high in trans fatty acids, which would loosen up the fat in that part of the brain, you get the circulation going, get them exercising, and the melatonin and tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin. So guess what would happen after 90 days? Serotonin would rise and the lights came on. Then they would begin their behavioral therapy, not before. They would wait until they saw that part of the brain light up. Then the therapy would have some effect. Otherwise, it was just kind of like pouring the water out of the pitcher. Nothing would really happen. But again, this idea that the amygdala manages that defensive protective function, those animal instincts, if you will. And it's interesting, we also believe that there is a direct smell function. There is a direct neural connection to the amygdala that bypasses the frontal thinking so that the amygdala can respond from smell. And there is significant research also that there is some uncanny capacity to know when someone's staring at you from behind. That there's just some uncanny, there are direct sensory neural circuits to the amygdala that don't have to go through higher brain function. So there is some uncanny sensory processing to the amygdala.